timekeeper, recorder, and moderator extraordinaire for today's debate, Mr. Brian Franklin. Brian, take it away.
Hey, so I'd like to welcome you guys to the debate. We're going to be debating today about, the resolution today is this House believes that the vaccination schedule recommended by the CDC from 0 to 18 years should be mandatory by law. And so, yeah, we'd like to go ahead and begin the debate.
Hi, I am Woody Sibion, and I will be speaking about how this House affirms that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC's, recommended vaccination schedule from birth to 18 years old should be mandated by law. In this case, we have three definitions. The first is CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. It is designed and dedicated to protecting Americans from health, safety, and security threats, both foreign and in the United States. Our second definition is CDC's recommended vaccination schedule. This is a recommended immunization schedule designed to protect infants and children early in life when they are most vulnerable, and before that they're exposed to the life-threatening diseases protected by these vaccines. Our last definition is mandatory by law. Mandatory means required or commanded by some authority. In this case, the authority of the law would require that children from birth to the age of 18 years old follow the CDC's recommended vaccination schedule. In our observation, the pro side affirms that the resolution, by prioritizing a vaccination schedule designed to protect us against the spread of these deadly diseases. Lastly, in our three main points or advantages, I'd like to share with you as follows. In our first advantage, vaccines have decreased the spread of diseases dramatically. By mandating a vaccination schedule within the U.S., these vaccine-specific diseases will cease to exist. First, if we follow this schedule where we begin vaccinating children earlier in life and making sure that we're maintaining a routine until they're 18 years old, we'll be able to monitor the decrease of these diseases as each generation passes. If everyone follows the law mandating the schedule as presented, then the spread of infection will be very minimal. Currently, the vaccine-preventable diseases presence in America has declined. However, it's not completely gone. In fact, it takes only one infected individual carrying the disease to travel into America in an isolated area where individuals are not fully vaccinated to cause an outbreak. In some cases, vaccines have helped with the infection rates decreasing and ceasing to exist dramatically, as detailed from the impact of the vaccines in the United States. For instance, polio, smallpox, and diphtheria all have decreased by 100%, whereas whooping cough has decreased by 89.4% in the U.S. In our second advantage, we'll like to talk about how large communities that receive these vaccinations can save lives of others who are unable to receive them. Firstly, by establishing a community where a majority of individuals are on the same vaccination schedule, others who are unable to receive these vaccinations are safer from the spread of infection than if they're in an isolated situation. This creates an immunity bubble, otherwise known as community or herd immunity, that grants protections for babies who are too young to receive vaccines, unvaccinated children and adults, pregnant women, elderly adults, individuals with weakened immune systems, those who are allergic to the components found within these vaccinations, and also those who suffer from specific health disorders such as asthma, chronic illnesses, and also those who are undergoing cancer treatments. However, in order to achieve this herd immunity, the overall percentage of individuals who are vaccinated must not fall under a certain percentage, otherwise this bubble of immunity becomes ineffective. If the rate of unvaccinated individuals increases, so does their chances of contracting these diseases, and it can range from a variety of 83% to 96%. In our final advantage, I would like to speak on how not only do these vaccines save lives, but they also save money. They're very cost effective. In fact, it is cheaper to prevent a disease by vaccination than to be hospitalized and treated later.
1 minute.
Every dollar spent on childhood immunization saves at least $18.40. These points presented highlight why it's easier to follow the vaccination schedule, as well as how the benefits of vaccines outweigh the alternatives. and therefore we urge a pro ballot in today's debate.
I am.
Okay.
Oh, it's supposed to be in order?
No, it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
This one was the idea, but yes.
Good job, Carter.
10 points. Oh.
Okay. The government's first duty is to protect the people and not run their lives. Because I agree with this quote from the former President Ronald Reagan, this House negates the resolution. The House believes that the vaccination schedule recommended by the CDC, 0 through 18, should be mandatory by law. We're going to have our own two definitions that we'll be providing. As defined by Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of recommended is to suggest that someone or something would be good or suitable for a particular job or purpose, or to suggest that a particular action should be taken. Definition 2. As defined by Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of mandatory is made necessary, usually by law or by some other rule. The negative House negates the resolution by prioritizing the parental rights of deciding what happens to their child, the negative outcomes of vaccinations, and how vaccinations are unsafe and ineffective. Disadvantage 1. Vaccine choice is an individual right. The choice to vaccinate oneself and one's children is a fundamental human right. It is usually recognized that all healthcare interventions must take place under free and informed consent. In practice, mandatory vaccinations protect the majority of the population against disease, while causing injury and death among the genetically vulnerable. This is only justified when individuals, parents, and guardians are provided complete, accurate information of the risks and benefits before electing or refusing to undergo immunization. Without free or informed consent, mandatory vaccinations violate the rights of liberty and security of persons, especially since vaccine manufacturers have little liability for their unsafe products. Vaccination choice is a fundamental human right because it implicates our most precious rights to life, liberty, and the security of person. Basic laws, such as religious laws, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the U.S. Constitution, exist to protect human dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human race. It is unjustifiable for the state to deprive individuals of accurate information, then to coerce them to accept potentially life-threatening medical interventions. Disadvantage 2. Jacobson versus Massachusetts. The state's rights to compel vaccination in this country stem from a 1905 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Jacobson versus Massachusetts. In this case, the Supreme Court upheld Massachusetts' rights to require adults to be vaccinated during a smallpox epidemic. While Supreme Court found Massachusetts regulation reasonable for protecting the public's health, it is also pointed out that its decision would not justify regulation so arbitrary and oppressive that they would be cruel and inhumane in the last degree. Based on Jacobson, every state now offers at least the formal right of medical exemption from vaccinations. As we can see, the ending compulsory vaccination is its own human rights struggle, and has been agreed upon previously that it is unjust to mandate vaccinations. Therefore, changing what the Supreme Court has ruled on previously would only violate the parent's individual right as a parent and as a citizen. So moving on to our opponents, or the affirmatives' first advantage. So they were saying that the vaccines have decreased because with vaccines you're able to monitor the disease and the spread will be minimal. Later on in the case, we will have someone talk about how spreading would be minimal. It's not factually true. That in fact, that if you do receive vaccinations, that you were the one spreading the cause, not the person who was previously vaccinated. So if you were unvaccinated, you are not the problem. It is the people that are being vaccinated. So that will go on later. And in Advantage 2, where it talks about large communities and the herd immunity. Herd immunity is once again something that we will later talk about in this case, because herd immunity is something we really do deeply care about, and it's something that we believe only strengthens our case and it weakens the affirmative House. And for the third advantage, where it talks about saving money, where it says it's cheaper to vaccinate, it's only $18.40 to vaccinate a child. Is it really worth $18.40 for individual rights? Individual rights is the #1 topic we should be debating about today. Individual rights is the #1 thing that happens in the United States. Therefore, we should only prioritize human fundamental basic rights rather than $18.40 and saving money to vaccinate. Therefore, we only go for a negative ballot. Thank you. Oh, you have a question?
Okay.
When you talked about how herd immunity strengthens your case, how do you expect to achieve herd immunity without anyone being vaccinated?
Well, herd immunity, it only comes from people that are vaccinated. which is what we're going to be talking about later on in the case. Herd immunity only happens with people who are vaccinated. The unvaccinated do not cause herd immunity. So we can see that if we don't vaccinate our children, herd immunity probably will be abolished if you just let people make their own decision and let them make their own basic human individual rights.
All right. Thank you. There you go.
I'm sorry. Alright. This House affirms Center for Disease Control and Prevention's recommended vaccination schedule from the ages of 0 to 18 should be mandatory by law. To extend what Woody said about herd immunity. So in order to create herd immunity, a certain percentage of people need to be vaccinated for certain diseases. So let's say if you decide not to get your child vaccinated and you think, oh, because everyone else gets their kids vaccinated, my child will be okay. That's not technically true. So what happens is, in order for, for example, measles, in order for measles to achieve herd immunity, between 99% of the people have to be vaccinated. So even if 98% of the people aren't vaccinated, your unvaccinated child has a risk of getting measles, which does have a 20% mortality rate. Also to extend on cost. So it is only $18.40 to get a tetanus shot. Without insurance, it's a little higher. But to be treated for tetanus, it requires a 17-day stay in the hospital. It comes out to $102,584 and $100 extra for every outpatient visit. To refute what the negative said, so their big thing was individual rights and the government having to protect their people. She emphasized protect very clearly. It is the government's duty to protect us. So why in the world would they just not allow, why would they give us a choice to keep our bodies safe? Why would they give us a choice to potentially hurt someone else? So essentially, if your child has, we'll go with whooping cough this time, and for some reason you think, oh, I'm going to take my kid to the park. So there could be a child there who, or actually, scratch whooping cough, we'll put chicken pox. So you take your child to the park. There's children there who are too young. You get the chickenpox vaccination when you're 5 years old. We'll say there's a 3-year-old there. So they contract chickenpox. And believe it or not, chickenpox can be deadly. So this child has chickenpox now, and we can say they die. So the parents of the children who did not vaccinate their children are responsible for that child's death. That can be considered negligent homicide. Also, negative outcomes. So there are some people who believe there are unsafe toxins in vaccinations. They have concern over the use of formaldehyde, mercury, or aluminum in vaccinations, when there are only trace amounts of these chemicals found used in FDA-approved vaccines. And according to FDA and CDC, formaldehyde is actually produced at higher rates by your own metabolic system, and there are actually no scientific evidence that small amounts of aluminum and mercury are harmful to your body. Also, they come up with risks. The most common risk is autism. So in a 1997 study, this British surgeon claimed that vaccines cause autism. So this has been discredited amongst almost every professional biologist and doctor out there. It was discredited due to serious procedural errors, undisclosed financial areas of interest, and ethical. The CDC actually states on their website that there are links to autism due to certain vaccine ingredients. Do you have the evidence to support it?
Also on the CDC website, they give you a link to this article about autism and how it's rebuffed. So Dr. Wakefield got his medical license taken away and the paper was retracted. I got that off the CDC website. Also, they say it is for the religious laws. It is your religious freedom if your religion says you don't have to get vaccinated. We researched all the major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, that have links to vaccinations. All of them said that it comes down to your personal preference. There is actually no religion out there that explicitly says that you can't get vaccinated. So it really does come down to personal preference and not just using
your religion as an excuse to not vaccinate your child.
30 seconds.
We didn't hear the
That's fair. That's fine. Who are we getting here from?
Hi guys. Sorry. Okay, before I start my part, I would like to refute the whole religious preference that if they are allowed to, if you are allowed to use religious preference to say that there's no, there's no proof that it is against a religion to use the vaccinations, then forcing legalization of all vaccines for children up to the age of 18 takes away the parents' right to be parents. Parents now have the right to do their research and look at the ingredients in our vaccines. They have the right to choose what is administered to our children. When a child gets a vaccine today, we are told that a whole list of possible side effects to look for. At 2 months old, a baby starts receiving their vaccinations, and it receives its first round of shots: Hep B, RV, DTaP, HIB, PCV, and IPV. Did you know that in just the side effects in DTaP alone, which defined as diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis,
4 minutes.
are a lot more than just mild crankiness that the pediatrician warned you about. This vaccine contains ingredients that causes seizures in children this young because their nervous systems are still developing and can allow foreign proteins in the brain and cause damage and permanent brain damage. With the many ingredients in just the DTaP vaccination, how are parents supposed to know which specific ingredient is causing issues to their children? This is just another reason why a parent should reserve the right to make the decision on whether or not their child is vaccinated. Growing scientific and medical evidence demonstrates the dangers of vaccines in some children. Even the federal government concedes that there is this problem. It established the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Compensation Program to reimburse parents for children who die or are permanently disabled by vaccines. For many years, routine childhood vaccinations have been required in all 50 states. Many states provide religious, medical, and philosophical exemptions for those who
3
need them.
minutes.
But some organizations and individuals argue that across-the-board mandatory immunizations are necessary to protect the health of our nation's youth and to avoid epidemics. These advocates are calling for legislation that would mandate vaccines for all children. And I want to take a quick break real quick and talk about how you brought up chickenpox. Chickenpox can actually, because it is kind of like the flu vaccine, they change it every time to try and find a strain that works best for children with chickenpox. In the article, Should Vaccines Be Mandatory?, Shanna Cluck talks about how her friend her friend's daughter had the varicella vaccine, which is the vaccine to prevent chickenpox, and within 6 months was in the nurse's office, and the nurse was flustered, saying, "Did you get the required varicella vaccine?" And she had. This was just one of the many side effects from the chickenpox vaccine, is actually getting chickenpox at a harsher rate than most children who don't get vaccinated for chickenpox vaccine.
Okay, so it's actually proven that those symptoms that you experience after getting the virus is actually your immune system trying to fight it off, so you don't actually receive it. So,
But this, even on the CDC website, which I actually have this right here, Dr. William Atkinson, senior epidemiologist on the CDC, admitted that the chickenpox and measles vaccine transmissions have been clearly documented among vaccinated persons because both vaccines contain strands of the virus themselves, just like the flu vaccine.
they're supposed to though, so your immune system can fight them off.
But after 6 months,
Sorry.
Why are parents expected to raise their children correctly, teach them right from wrong, and be responsible for them if the government wants to step in and control this part of parenting? As a mother myself,
1 minute.
I carried my daughter for 42 weeks. I took care of my health, in turn, which took care of hers. And once she's born, the government is supposed to take control of how I see to parent her. Babies are routinely overdosed with multiple rounds of vaccinations,
Many are injected with more than 8 to 9 in just one doctor's visit. These vaccines contain a range of dangerous ingredients, including toxins like formaldehyde linked to organ damage, neurological disorders, and furthermore,
30 seconds.
immunizations are not just adjusted by infant weight, and babies are not screened for potential adverse reactions beforehand.
Hello, I'm Janelle Garcia. Our house is still affirming that the Center of Disease Control and Prevention is recommended vaccination schedule birth through 18 years old should be recommended by law. I feel like the argument over here mainly, as stated in the very beginning, is the freedom and rights. In the 1905 Jacobson versus Massachusetts case that was talked about over here, it upheld the authority of state to enforce mandatory vaccination laws. For some vaccination requirements, there are individuals that can be exempted medically because this has been done before. Or individuals have the choice to have a medical exemption. With that, because this case has been brought to court already, it's possible to have exemption again if that were the case of this law becoming recommended. It can also be done at a nationwide scale. With that, it's really cool because the court provides the parent's right to have whether or not they want their child to be
4 minutes.
vaccinated or not. So, it really does bring freedom with that court case of Jacobson versus Massachusetts. It allows the parents to have the right to decide whether they want their child vaccinated or not due to medical exemptions, and the court provides that right. As I think you guys stated earlier, we stated earlier that it's cheaper to prevent a disease than to treat it. I know that our preventing that disease in the shot is $18.40, and you said that to have that right, we should pay more, and it's worth more. So, with that, as we stated earlier, it's cheaper to prevent a disease than to treat it. As the disease continues to increase, you're spending more money, and Claire stated earlier that every single outpatient pays $100, if not more. It was also stated just now that if you want to be a good parent, you should want the best for your
3
children.
minutes.
With this case, there is no correlation between high mortality rate and vaccinations, but however, there is a correlation between preventable diseases and high mortality rate. According to the BBC, there was a mother in Australia who was pregnant and refused to get the pertussis shot, correct. While she was pregnant, she ended up contracting this disease, and it ended up being a really close situation to death. The child was passed on this disease as well, and it was just not such a great outcome. But because she refused to get that shot, she was contracted the disease, and it put the child and the mother both at risk. Going back to wanting to be a better parent and have the best for their children, I believe through that Jacobson and Massachusetts case, it did bring the right for her to have that choice, but she chose to not get her kid vaccinated, which brought that end result. So,
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
and that is all I have to say.
Alright. The Institute of Medicine published a report called The Adverse Effects of Vaccines, Evidence and Casualties, and acknowledged there's a high risk factor not yet identified by medical scientists that can increase the individual's susceptibility to vaccine reactions. The main problem with forcing vaccines, according to the Institute of Medicine themselves, say that many kids will have complications from the vaccines because of pre-existing issues such as genetic variants, environmental exposures, behaviors, intervening illness, or developmental stages. That's just a couple, which they can all interact. So when a child is vaccinated, the immune system is actually weakened for an amount of time depending on the vaccination. During that time, it's susceptible to catching other viruses, which can do even more harm. There's a new study published in a peer-reviewed medical journal by the NBIC that has helped to make publicly accessible to everyone, which reveals that developed nations with poor infant mortality rates, like the U.S., tend to give their infants more doses of vaccines before the age of 1. The study's authors found that a high statistical significant correlation between increasing numbers of vaccine doses
4 minutes.
and increasing infant mortality rates. To put this into perspective, doctors give American babies 26 doses of vaccines before the age of 1, which is twice as many vaccines as babies in Sweden and Japan get. So is it really just a coincidence that the infant mortality rate is just twice as high in America compared to Sweden or Japan? A mother and father's worst nightmare is to watch a baby die before reaching their first birthday. When a healthy baby dies unexpectedly, shortly after routine vaccination, often parents will ask the doctor, what happened? Why did this go wrong? They're usually met with quick denials by doctors and public health officials anxious to defend the safety of vaccines. The death certificate of many babies who die shortly after vaccinations often lists sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, as the cause of death, which means that no specific symptoms or other reason for death could be found. So how much do we really know about these vaccines to say that they should be legalized, that all kids should have them? Well, like once again, the Institute of Medicine commented on this and said
3 minutes.
the safety of current federally recommended childhood vaccine schedules found that they have not all been fully studied. So viruses are constantly changing, and with that, we have to make the vaccinations constantly change also, keep up with that. And when you're doing that, there has to be a lot of tests done. And this is where the money comes in. The amount, $18.40, has been thrown around a lot in this argument. And the fact of that is, who is paying for this? When you make this legal, or when you make this bill legal, that every parent has to have their kid get these vaccinations, where's this money coming from? You can't just make this legal and just expect this money to show up out of nowhere. That's not even including tests for the children. Children have been proven to have allergies to these vaccines. You have to test the kids also. That's more money coming out of pocket. So before you can just start injecting every kid in the United States with every vaccination, you have to test the kid for allergies they might have with these vaccines. And like I said, who is going to pay for this? You can't put an unfair burden on parents to pay for testing and see if their child will get sick from a vaccine
2
that they're
minutes.
being forced to give their kid.
You just mentioned who's going to pay the $18.40, and I'd like to refute that with who's going to pay the $100 for the outpatient fee as well. So although money does need to come from somewhere, and parents can get insurance, some people may not, at the end of the day, if they do contract this disease, they'll still have to pay more than just the $18. That's a very minimal and cost-effective way of fighting these diseases with the vaccines other than hospitalization.
Yeah, but instead of giving the parent the option, I mean, when you decide not to get a vaccine, the odds of you just getting the virus because you didn't get the vaccine aren't very high. You're just making sure that you're not going to get it. So when you don't get the vaccine, it's just like when you get a vaccine, it's like you're buying insurance. You're making sure you're not going to get it, but in the case, it actually can cause more damage. So
1 minute.
So there's a term that everyone's been also saying, which is herd immunity, and that will only apply if everyone is vaccinated, and not everyone can get vaccinated. So what if a child has the allergies, like I mentioned, or which has been proven that there are additives, in fact, that some kids can't get the vaccine because of that additive, because they're allergic to it. And so because they can't get it, it just ruins the whole point of the herd immunization. And so when a parent can't afford to give their kid the mandatory by law things, what are we going to do? Are we going to fine the parents so they have to pay more money they wouldn't have? Are we going to send them to jail? I mean, you're just taking away a basic human right, and you're infringing upon these people that, I mean, it just makes no sense. So in the end, it makes no sense to make these parents pay extraneous amounts of money for something that might not even work in the end. It can make things worse, and you're forced to do something that in the end could hurt their kid more than help. Thank you.
Time.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. This House affirms that the CDC's recommended vaccination schedule presented for children aged 0 to 18 should be mandatory by law. One thing you just finished saying is that $18 is an extraneous amount. Now, $18 compared to $100,000 if the child is to retract this disease is nothing. That
Question. Did we ever state if this is $18 with insurance or
with insurance. Without insurance, the price is more like $200. Still a fraction compared to $100,000 if you were to get the disease. You also said that this getting vaccines would hurt more than help the child. And Janelle began to touch on it. The risks and deaths associated with vaccines are so low, it's actually 1 in every 2 million cases in the U.S., according to the CDC's website.
4 minutes.
Are you aware by not getting a vaccine, you're not proven to actually get the disease?
Say it again?
Are you aware that if you don't get a vaccine for a virus, that you're not going to get the virus? Because your argument is saying you don't get the vaccine, you're almost guaranteed to get it.
No, our argument is saying if you get the vaccine, you do retract, like you said, traces of the vaccine so your immune system can learn to fight it off. But that's not harmful to the child. The child gets better because of the vaccines. And that leads to herd immunity, which requires a lot of vaccination within a group to be effective. For herd immunity to be effective within a community, 99%, like we said earlier, of the community has to be vaccinated for an individual not to be affected by the disease. We'll go back to the court case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, talking about freedom, talking about individual rights. It leaves space for individual rights in that court case, and that's on a state level, and that was over 100 years ago. That court case was in 1905, and so 100 years later, there is no information that says we can't do it on a national scale. They started to touch on religious preferences as well. They never really finished their thought about it. They sort of brought it up. They said religious preferences and then kind of faded away. I'm going to touch on that a little more. No major religion has it written in their text, in the book, in the material that they read from, worship, learn from. Nothing is written in there that says they should be anti-vaccination. It is only listed that these individuals have their own preferences. If an individual is to worship something so heavily that they believe getting a vaccine gets in the way of this right, then they have the individual freedom to get medical exemption and not to get the vaccine. So that's not a problem. They also began to say that vaccines don't harm, or vaccines do harm, right, but they don't. If a vaccine is harmful, imagine how harmful a disease would be. Try to compare those. Either you get the vaccination and are almost guaranteed to be safe from the disease, or you get the disease and you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars when you could have spent not more than $200 at the beginning. So we believe, above all else, the health of children as they mature into adults that will lay the foundation for future American health deserve and should be encouraged and required to better their own health by committing to the vaccination schedule recommended by the CDC. Oh, you're right. Thanks.
So, to conclude for the negative's entire argument, and to refute the last argument that the affirmative made, the entire argument about Jacobs versus Massachusetts, the entire reason that the negative brought it up was to talk about that in there. It also said that that regulations so arbitrary and oppressive should not be instated, and it would be cruel and inhumane to do that. That is the whole reason why Jacobson versus Massachusetts is a big deal, because yes, we all agree that there is the medical exemption in there, but the thing is, if you try to regulate it for every single child in America, it's not one size fits all. Every child is different. Every child has its tics, every child has its own allergies. Who's to say that these vaccines are okay for every single child in America? There is no reason why we should benefit the life of our children, their own personal beliefs, just to say that we should mandate this just in case that disease doesn't happen.
4 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
When you say that, we did speak that the reason why herd immunity exists and why it's such a great thing is because it creates an immunity bubble with at least 90% of the individuals who are vaccinated. So for those people who are allergic to some of the components found in the vaccines, herd immunity, by mandating everyone get it and have exemptions for the people who can't get it, those who do get it can protect those who are unable to get it.
To touch on that, the thing is that that the entire resolution states that it should be mandatory by law for every single child. As I previously stated, it's not a one-size-fits-all for every child. And this immunity bubble and the herd immunity, it's a big deal because, yes, every child in this bubble probably won't get it, or they might get it. We don't know that. We haven't really tried to see if mandatory by law would work. But the thing with the law is, and what's beautiful about the United States of America and the U.S. Constitution is the fact is everyone has their own fundamental human right and their own beliefs. To touch on the no major religion, how it says it does not say that they should not be anti-vaccination.
Okay, in the 2015 court case Phillips versus the City of New York, it is stated that students with these genuine and sincere religious beliefs who are exempt from vaccinations can go to school, but if the disease starts to spread, then they are to be subject to exemption or expulsion from school. So why would you risk the spread of disease rather than just...
But that's just in one simple case. We're talking about the entire United States of America.
But it's the entire city of New York.
But the entire city of New York is just one tiny example. The fact that we're going to use a
That's the
one-size-fit-all.
largest city in America.
Once again, it's just a one-size-fit-all for every single person. Do you think that's humane? Do you think that's oppressive? This is the Jacobson case stated previously, which is way before the New York case. It stated it is inhumane in the last degree to do this to every single person. Anyways, to go on back to about the cost and the money problems and how it's cheaper. In the negative opinion, it is not okay to just throw around money. Money is not, it should not matter when it comes to the fact of our own individual, fundamental, human, personal beliefs. And the fact that in our Constitution and by our own free will, we have the right to decide what we want to do. If the entire thing is that, like the quote I stated previously, it's to protect the people. We agree that it protects the people, but also not run their lives. By mandating a law stating that every child through the age of 0 through 18 should get a vaccination is running their lives. We have our own individual rights, and we have our own things that we personally believe. And it should not just be able to just say that it's because of a medical exemption or religious exemption. If you don't want to do it, that's on you. That's your personal belief. The thing is that the United States and this legislation and the affirmative house should not infringe on your own personal rights and your fundamental human beliefs. Thank you.
All right, thank you for joining us for the debate. So thank you to the debaters and the people who watched. Anyway, a round of applause for everyone.